All right. I will
I know what you want.
turn the music off for a sec and we'll get everybody gathered. I imagine we'll have people straggling in through the whole time, so we'll give them a second to get organized. How's my sound now? Good?
Perfect.
I do have the recording on.
Should we do a bit of calming the default mode network to start with?
Sure. You want to lead us?
All right. Well, I'd just like everyone just to close their eyes. Just setting the intention to drop into the present moment. Start connecting to the breath. Just noticing there's a shortness of breath, a tightness. Don't judge, just observe for now. Letting go of the day. I know I've been working harder than I've ever worked before, but just see if you can let it all go. And this is your time to learn. And let's all letting all out of air together and then collectively breathing in from the lower abdomen up into the upper abdomen. And then just letting it all out with a sigh. Let's do one more. Breathe in. And then on the next one, I just want you to hold it up at the top. So breathing in. I just want you to bring love into your heart right now and just hold it a bit for yourself for taking this moment. And then expanding it out to everyone on this call for being on this same journey with you. And letting it all out. And when you're ready, opening up your eyes and get ready for some incredible wisdom and magic and love from my good friend Mike.
All right. Thank you, Finn. For those of you who don't know him, that is Finn Kelly. He's the president of EO Colorado and a good friend, and has been along with me on this journey, both like through my Hacking Happiness work, but also as presidents of the two chapters at the same time. So we've got a lot of things going on in common. And so when we sort of offhandedly last week said, hey, should we do a talk for people to, and, of course, so we put it on we said, sure, that sounds like a great idea. And then of course you put it on the calendar and you go, oh my God, I've got so many things on the calendar. I've got a lot of work to do, but so Finn was scheduled to be to be one of our hosts at our San Francisco chapter retreat coming up. That was originally scheduled for June 3rd, which will now be at some point in the future. But so I wanted to have him along with us today. I'm going to share my screen, and we'll just start going. We'll have the chat open, so everybody seems to be muted now. If you have questions along the way, fire them into the chat, and we'll keep our eyes open on them, and we can answer along the way, or maybe take some time at the end. This is not something we in this format have done very much, so we'll see how it goes, and we'll take it along the way. We'll kind of wing it a little bit conversationally. Let me start here. Share this guy and put it in presentation mode. Good. Everybody see what we got going on?
Yep.
All right. crisis. We were talking about how we might frame what we're doing here. This is, based on the internal work that I've done over the last several years, mastering our neurotransmitters for optimal performance, for happiness, for joy and confidence, and managing our stress, the triggers of our stress. And of course, in these times, one of the things that I've noticed Finn doing very well is, because Finn is such a master practitioner, keeping us, reminding us to do the work and how to do the work, and small, tricks and techniques along the way. So what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the framework and the science, and then also along the way, the practice and what we're doing and what we might be able to do also. You can email either of us anytime, and we can happy to share. This is Finn and me at Burning Man giving a version of this talk last summer. We didn't have any slides then, and so we had Finn was acting out the part of serotonin in the talk, and this is me in the act of communicating love to the audience. I love you. In my work, I've found that I can focus on 4 neurotransmitters as the biology of our emotions. These hormones, as they rise and fall, create distinct emotional states in our bodies. The 4 are serotonin, which is the it's the anchor happiness chemical. Serotonin is our feeling of joy and confidence and inspiration and self-actualization. It's giving. It's that act of giving and contributing. Oxytocin is our love hormone. So when I say I love you, I am feeling oxytocin. For those of us when you're, for example, in a great forum experience or a great EO chapter experience, that community feeling, that like, oh my God, I am so glad that you people are with me in this room, that feeling is oxytocin. And being able to share and give and care for those people, that feeling is oxytocin. That feeling that we have with everybody on this call right now is oxytocin. So those are the first 2. Dopamine is a reward chemical, and when we talk about when we're in typical achievement mode, most of our lives, we're focusing on our dopamine. When we're goal setting, when we're hitting our sales numbers, we're feeling dopamine. I'm doing a webinar that we just announced for our sales prospects next Wednesday. I didn't have any idea if people were going to care or if they wanted to hear what we were talking about. But we sent out an invitation this morning, and instantly we get people registering, and and the number is climbing, and all of a sudden we have to upgrade our Zoom account because we need 500. We need to get to the 500 person limit. Like, those were my dopamine hits, and dopamine feels amazing. But we're going to learn about why it's insufficient, especially in this environment. And then the 4th is cortisol. Cortisol is our stress hormone. Cortisol is anger and fear. It's the fight or flight experience. So some of our experience here, there may be people around you, or you might notice for yourself when you get into that mode of where everything is just assaulting us and hitting us so hard. One of the reactions is like, I couldn't even look at the emails today. I couldn't respond to them. I couldn't. And that's the cortisol experience. That is us feeling those anxieties and fears. And all 4 of these work together. So our job is to master these, to manage them, to use them when they are when they are useful, and take them to our advantage. Finn, before I move on, do you have any other comments on those four?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, we have other hormones with us, but these are like the four main things. So think about when you're like working out, there's 100 different muscle groups you can exercise, but people who are pretty functional with their body know that if you do push-ups, pull-ups, deadlifts, and some squats, you pretty much meet all of them. And that's why this framework is so powerful, because it just gets you focused, and very similar to think of like the values. When companies have more than four values, people can't remember them. So what this does is it enables you to get less caught up in your emotions and the feelings that are going on, and you can actually label them. And you're like, oh, that's right, I'm low on oxytocin right now, or oh, I've been chasing dopamine. And I think that's one of the most important parts of this, and why your framework is so powerful. It just gives you simple tools and levers to understand where you're at in any position. And I think that's what we're going to touch on right now.
Awesome. They work in concert too. So, for a lot of times I've really noticed, some of you may have found yourself in this mode recently where you're working with the team and you're fired up and like all cylinders are going. And, I've been going like 12-hour days, working with both the EO chapter and my employees, and that invigorated, charged time is the feeling of all those kicking in. All of those, all four of them, meaning like we're a team, we're in this together, we can feel, and we're like making progress, and we can feel the serotonin, the teamwork, the community of oxytocin. We're actually moving forward, and we can feel that dopamine. But the stress is there. We're like, we are in a place where we have to act, and there's a lot of uncertainty in front of us. So we find ourselves in this charged state pretty commonly. The trick that we have to make sure that we want to do in this time is that we don't fall into the driven mode here in the middle. The driven mode is where we are like just knocking down, we got to take these actions, and we've got to make our sales, and we've got to reach out to new people, without the emotional foundation of the love and joy, the confidence of serotonin and oxytocin. Very early on, as the crisis started unfolding, a friend of mine had a comment about how he was, his sales were going to fall, and he was going to drive his sales team even harder. And his because he's a driven entrepreneur, his default state is to be in that dopamine cortisol cycle, and he hadn't yet realized the real power of having the full set underneath him. And the trick is, of course, because if we stay into that unsustainable mode too long, then we fall into the depressed state where all that's left is cortisol. We are stuck in inaction. We're in fight or flight mode. And that's when our poor decisions get made, because the cortisol takes us out of strategic vision. Cortisol gives us narrow focus, as opposed to the wide focus that oxytocin and serotonin give us. So oxytocin and serotonin give us opportunity to see the visibility to see opportunity. Cortisol forces us to, all we can do is think about running from the lion right now, man. And so it's useful to get us away from the lion, but it doesn't help us see how to grow, how to build a shelter so that we can stay away from the lion in the future. Finn?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things to add on there. So right now, it would actually be quite hard to differentiate between the invigorated and the driven person, because they're probably getting very similar outputs right now in the short term. However, over the long term, the driven person will eventually burn out, and you'll see this. And I shared that very early on with like my EO board and also the other people in my life. I was like, if we see this as a crisis, we're going to just burn out. Like, and we act like it's a crisis. Like, we have to take action, but this is the new norm. Like, this is a long-term area. So we need to make sure that we are still focusing on the serotonin and oxytocin. And the big difference for me between the two are, there's people right now who are driven out of fear, and they're driven. They're driven, they're getting results, and like they're going all in. And it's good, because there's also some people who are just so caught up in the fear and they don't have any oxytocin boost that they're dead, their head in the sand. Then there's this other group who are like, I can do this, I can get myself out of it. But it's almost like they're loving the fear and the challenge. They're going to eventually burn out. And then there's this other group, and I think I know personally, this is where I'm at for myself and Mike. It's almost like, oh, this is why I'm here. This is my opportunity to lead. It's almost like I feel like I've been awoken. I've been like this sleeping lion, and nothing has been like, I haven't really been leading as much as I could be. And it's like, this is my purpose. This is why I exist. And it's because I'm really clear of my purpose and values. So my serotonin and oxytocin is like boosted up big time. And even though I'm working harder than ever, I'm completely fine. And I'm calm in that regard. So that's just something to be thinking about there.
Yeah. You had a quick a comment in there about your values and being clear on your values. What I've observed is that values, especially personal values and company values, they're an expression of serotonin. So the reason that values statements work well, they help propel a company or a family or person forward, is because these are the things we hold important. And when we act in our values, we realize that we are in congruity with the things that we hold important. And that therefore our body reacts with serotonin. Our body is feeling the like, this is what I'm good at. This is what I enjoy. This is how I should live my life. And it is the biology of why value statements work really well. Values exercises work really well.
Mm-hmm. And I have one other thing there as well, Mike. You spoke about the entrepreneur who's driven, and they're like forcing that person in sales. Now, the interesting thing, that entrepreneur might be actually in an invigorated and charged state, because they're clear about their purpose, their values. They know the big vision. They're working towards it. So they're all driven, like they're invigorated, they're charged. But the problem is they're then trying to push team members without any serotonin and oxytocin, and you're putting them into a driven state. And that's a real challenge as well. And I know I'm a culprit of that. It's like, all right, I've got to make sure I keep coming back and just keep giving the love.
Yep, that's exactly right. So our goal here is what I call the superpower. This is a state. This is our default state. This is where we have the serotonin, the oxytocin, and dopamine high, meaning we are in giving, loving, doing mode, but without the fear, anxiety, anger, without the negative emotions, without the challenge. Now, this is our mastery state. When we get the crisis time, or like we've had to make the tough calls with, we did a salary reduction across the board, and I have to go make that call to all of my staff. I made it this week. The cortisol is going to rise, and I'm going to focus on that task at hand. You can think of cortisol in that sense like your heart rate. You want your heart rate to rise when you're exercising, and you want it to be low when you're not exercising, right? So you want to use it for that crisis moment, and then we want to drop it back down when we're not in that crisis moment. And this is, of course, this critical time now when it feels like we're in crisis moment for 24 hours a day for weeks. This is why we wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it and sweating, and and these are the things that keep us from sleeping, and because our cortisol is up and we're worried about, and we are in this crisis time all the time. So our job is to drop the cortisol when we're not actively taking action.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that cortisol isn't bad. It's part of us. Where it gets bad is when we allow it to build up. So cortisol is brilliant at alerting us. It's like that, alerting us to take action. Then we need to take action and drop it back down again. Where it builds up is a lot of the time where we let it build up and then we don't actually take any action, and we see that. It's like, so in the army, like I was a trained army officer, and that, like, if you actually had to break down all the years of our intense training, it was one thing. It was just make a decision. Because once you made a decision, you were on a path. And then even if the decision was completely wrong, you would work it out before any of your soldiers did. And then you could just alter the path. And I see that as like the cortisol thing. It's like, take some action and then let it go.
That's great. So really our techniques that we are paying attention to are the techniques that we can use to increase our serotonin, our oxytocin, our dopamine, and decrease our cortisol along the way. In my work, I've called it hacking happiness. Like, these are hacks that we can use, physical, mental, mindset hacks, tools that we can use to bring those up, to drop the cortisol when we don't need it. And then when it comes time to really act, then we can go have all four of them on stage. If we don't, and really one of the tricks for many entrepreneurs is that we get in the dopamine cortisol cycle. And we get in that mode because, you can succeed in that. Like, you can make money with dopamine and cortisol. You can drive the sales team for really hard and succeed with dopamine and cortisol. But the true greatness, the true path to leadership, I argue, is serotonin and oxytocin first, and then dopamine, and having our cortisol out of the picture. It's funny, Finn and I were talking about traction earlier, and EOS, the process. If you look at, or scaling up the Rockefeller habits practice, these systems talk about, they typically mention things like mission statements and values alignments first, but then they go into driving to a plan. The plan is the dopamine. The foundation in advance are the values and the mission things. Those are the serotonin or oxytocin. And they can sometimes get ignored once the plan is created and we get into serotonin, or we get into dopamine cortisol mode. Finn, you were talking a little bit about that earlier.
Yeah, so one of the challenges I had with the level 10 meeting structure in Traction or anything is, like, it gets very focused on the issues, and that becomes the whole meeting, and it's all about cortisol. And I was almost rebelling against it for a while, but then I actually looked at it and I went, how does these hormones overlay with the format? And there's just some slight tinkerings, and you can actually follow the same format. So to start with, we started this meeting with calming the default mode network. So everyone comes into a meeting, they're bringing other crap into it. We need to calm them down, because if you're not calm, we're not going to be in a state where we're present. And that's one of the most important things for a meeting. So doing a little conscious breathing or meditating to start with. Then if you look at the level 10, it shares good news. What that is serotonin. It's how are we doing great? Share some news. Where have you got joy, wonder, greatness in your role? It's just a slight little tinkering, but talking about serotonin helps people to focus on that. So we deal with that. We then go into dopamine, the scorecard. Where are we progressing? Now, Mike and I have some views that a lot of scorecards are actually cortisol rising, because it's all about, we're not where we're at, because we set some unreasonable goal, and it now brings up cortisol. Where if you use progressive numbers, leading indicators, and you're building on each week, then you actually get a dopamine hit because you're seeing that you're getting progression. So we go through the scorecard, and then we get into issues, which is cortisol, and we actually talk about it. What's causing us as a business and individuals cortisol right now? And then it makes it a little bit more, it's not an issue. It's like, oh, this is affecting our cortisol. And something about it just changes the thought process. And you're like, oh, I actually want to make sure I address this. And it's not personal because this is affecting all of us. And then the most important thing is finishing with a big oxytocin round. So we do a round of appreciations. We do this in forum as well. Just like, I'll just pick around on a Zoom screen. I'll go, okay, we're all going to the right. And we just say something we love about them. And we finish with a big boost of oxytocin. And through that, everyone's a lot calmer, which is really, really cool. So that's just a one way to approach, rather than the ending. I think where it goes wrong in level 10s generally, they do all these issues, it rises up the cortisol. Well, first the cortisol was rise because they didn't hit the scorecard. Then they went into issues, the cortisol rises, and then they rate the meeting, which is very clinical. It's like rate the meeting, one word close, and everyone feels a bit deflated. So you're just adding on that oxytocin. People come out more charged. Generally, then the results are better as well.
That's great. There were a couple of things you mentioned in there that I would dive into a little more deeply. For those who aren't familiar with the term, the default mode network is the collection of nodes in our prefrontal cortex, a brain that react to stress. So they are the top level. They trigger the amygdala. The amygdala is the reptilian part of the brain, and the amygdala tells the adrenal gland to produce cortisol so we can jump into action. So the default mode network is a thing that's firing all the time and paying attention to all of the potential lions jumping out at us. So the actions that we did the breathing work here, or a gratitude exercise, a meditation. The meditation, so the default mode network pays attention to things like time, so past and future. When we are stressed and we're worried about what's going to happen in the future, that's the default mode network telling the amygdala to start firing out cortisol. It's why a lot of the wisdom, the ancient wisdom and the practice is about the now, being in the moment, because it turns out that past and future are triggers in the default mode network, which cause the cortisol expansion. So that's the effect of doing that. It's why when we do, for example, a gratitude exercise, and we led our board meeting yesterday with a gratitude exercise, it allows us to think about the now. It's not, I'm not grateful for something that might happen in the future. It's like, here's what I'm grateful for right in this moment. So that's the default mode network. Can
I jump in there quickly
Yeah.
before you do the next one? Like this now is the most important part of any spiritual practice. Whenever we are in any fear state, it means it's a warning that we've dropped out of the present moment. Because in the present moment, there is nothing to be fearful of. Like, I will challenge every single person, if you drop into the present moment, regardless of what's going on, you're like, I'm alive, I'm breathing, I'm here. And it's magic. So out of all the things I've done in my life and spiritual growth, that's really it. It's that. I could save people doing 100-day retreats and all these different things. Is like, drop into the present moment. And one of the most powerful tools to drop into the present moment is breath. You take a breath, you are there. It reminds you your life force is going, and you can't think at the same time you're consciously breathing. And that's the key, because when in the present moment, you're not thinking. thinking is that default mode network. It's pulling you out of the present moment, and it's past and future. It's quite hard to get your head around, but once you're there, it's incredibly powerful. And that's what I practice all day long now. I focus on, how do I keep dropping into the present moment right now?
Awesome. We'll do some breath. We'll do some. I'd love to hear more on your breath techniques as we get a little further down. You mentioned the first part of the level 10 meeting, which was the what did you call it? Not the wins. What you called it?
Like the serotonin, or they call it like good news or segue. I actually just call it, how is our serotonin?
It has your serotonin, right? That's what I do too. It's like, how's your serotonin? One thing that I noticed that I like to point out to people, especially business leaders in this concept, is when we talk about, when we get to that part of a meeting, we want to go into the wins. We got this sale and we did this. And when we talk about the wins, those are dopamine.
Yeah.
Those are conditional. The difference between dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, dopamine is conditional. Dopamine is, we did good at this thing. Oxytocin is, I love you, right? It's unconditional. Serotonin is, we are amazing. We do good work. There's no condition there. So the difference, the important thing for me in that time is, when we use that part of the meeting, we want to do it in an unconditional sense. It's not, I love you because you did good work. It's, I love you. So so that's a great element. And then
also really important. So that's a really important part with parenting as well. Most of our trauma in our life is because we got conditioned as a young person. Like, after an event occurred, they're like, oh, you won a race, and you're like, oh, you're amazing because you won that race. Automatically then, we are now trained, I'm only amazing because I won that race. And that's why we get on this success achievement focus. So it just needs to be, you are amazing. Like, just because you are, like, there's no reason because of it. You are perfect just the way you are. Really, really important. If we could fix that with our parenting, childhood trauma would just disappear.
Yeah, for sure. And I think about it with my staff too, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're not amazing because you, and you think about, parents among us will know this. They're like, when you get into that unconditional mode, the children react differently to us, right? And it's the same thing with our team. It's like, we go in unconditional mode, and there's a time for that. Like, that's the time in the beginning of that meeting to get our serotonin right. So those are the unconditional things. I like to stay away from the wins in that. We can go to the wins, as Finn pointed out, in the dopamine section. And here's a technique that I like for the dopamine section of those meetings. I like to structure, Finn talked about this a little bit, but let me try to emphasize it. I like to structure the wins, the goals, or the achievement in ways that you can't miss. So we get taught that we have to set BHAGs, or we set these goals that are measurable and like SMART goals, and we have these mode, but it causes us to create, as Finn pointed out, like they're arbitrarily high. And so rather than set an arbitrary goal of, like, we're going to do, like, put 20 people into this webinar I'm going to do next week, the way that I like to get the dopamine out of it is to simply report the number that can only climb. So, oh, we got 20 people on the webinar. Oh, we're up to 25. Like, well, we're now at 40. And so then each of those is a little hit of dopamine, makes us feel like it's conditional. We're doing good. We are, but we're not. So we're reporting on the things that can climb. So even in these times of super crisis, we're not setting new sales goals and things, but we look for those little metrics that are like ticking better. like, or that can, you know, oh, we got 4 in today, or whatever that number is a way to keep us, rather than going the opposite, which often happens, which is like, okay, we're going to ship 1,000 this month. And then, you know, day one, we're like, oh shit, we only got 5 out. We're only aiming at 200. Like we're a failure. We're immediately a failure when we, you know, put this goal that's too high. So rather it's just like, let's just do things that can only win.
And there's a great
so
example. A great example is IBM. When I can't remember what it was. There was about 30 years ago, big crisis, which like suddenly they were in crisis mode, and they brought and the salespeople weren't meeting the quotas and everything was challenging. They brought a consultant in, and the consultant looked at everything, and the consultant said, you actually need to drop your quotas by 90%. And if you do this, you're going to grow. And the reason why is because they studied the salespeople, and they saw it that if they weren't on track within the first week, what they would do, they'll be like, oh, I can't win. So they'll defer any contracts to come in the next month to have a chance of winning. And what that meant was everything delayed, cash flow and everything like that. So that one move, the CEO took it on and they changed it. And that's why IBM came the powerhouse for 20 years straight, because they were practicing this. Back then, it's just like have less and just build on. And then they coached them and just kept building.
That's fantastic. I love that. Okay, let's move on to some practice. Are there questions? I saw a couple in the chat here. Let's take a look real quick. I think we're good for now. You can use that chat, and I'll try to keep an eye on it. So the first hack that I talk about in my work is a mindset concept that I call no coming and going. It works like this. The brain and body, we talked about the default mode network and the amygdala and the adrenal gland. We talk about where the serotonin, for example, is produced and stored in our gut, and oxytocin is actually, some amount of oxytocin actually produced in our heart. You know, it's not a coincidence that we feel love in our heart, because there is oxytocin there. But the no coming and going concept, the mindset concept, is that there's no difference between inbound and outbound happiness. There's no receiving love that's different from giving love. There's only the level of the hormone. That means for me to build serotonin in myself, I merely give it to the people around me. So saying, I love you. And this, as we talked about in the meeting, that like talking about the unconditionalness, how the good work that we do, the good things that we are, that serotonin part is me giving it out. And the act of me giving it out is how it is one of the most powerful ways for me to build it in myself. It's why, so when I'm in, you know, mode where I'm helping people and I'm trying to help, you know, hundreds of people in our chapter and in EO, for example, I am invigorated for the day because my serotonin is high in giving it to the people around me. It's a technique that I love, that was really useful for me getting out of my personal crisis mode when I find myself in depressed states and in modes of inaction. That's the framework that I like to start with. Finn?
And it works for oxytocin as well. So it's the same thing. So serotonin, it's like we're giving it all. We're saying we're amazing, you're doing great and everything feels good. But oxytocin is like, go give a hug to someone. And if you hug them for 27 seconds, doesn't matter how much they're rigid, they'll eventually break down and they're just like, and it feels amazing. And you get that same feeling back, which is really important. So right now I am leaning in this more than ever. So I've observed my cortisol rising because I've got like 100 commitments. I'm working, all these different things. So whenever that happens, I do what the opposite from what most people do. At that moment, people distance themselves from their relationships. They go cold, unconnect, like they isolate themselves, where I'm leaning in. I just keep going into my girlfriend and just like, I'm just showering her with love and just like giving her hugs because it makes me feel better. Same with my forum members, leaning in so much because I'm like, it just gives me that boost. So it's a cool thing to play with.
Right. This no coming and going principle is why journaling is a super effective hack. It is, our brain is then we're forcing our brain to go through the exercise of, for example, writing moments of joy, recalling them, writing them down, writing our moments of gratitude. The act of conjuring those concepts, the brain has no way to conceive of those things without the corresponding serotonin. So it's why starting your day or taking any moment in the day to write random things in the journal, stream of consciousness, gets us out of default mode network, cortisol mode, and into serotonin creation. Finn, do you have techniques in particular that you like on the journaling side?
Yeah, I have a few. So one is this idea of stream of consciousness writing. So some people are limited by journaling because they're like, oh, what if I don't write the right thing down? It's like, no one's going to read it. This is yours. So I sometimes set a timer for 8 minutes and 20 seconds. That's the amount of time it takes for a beam of light from the sun to hit us. So it's like this, it's like basically connecting. I'm a channeler for source energy. And I just put my pen to paper and I'm like, I'm not going to stop. And I'm just going to just let it come out of me. It's an incredibly powerful tool. You can also do that, like set an intention. I want to write about love and just go and see what happens. Really powerful book writing technique as well. You just like hammer things out. So that's one thing I do. And with the gratitude, you need to be specific. So don't just say, I'm grateful for my family. Like, why are you grateful for your family? Like, bring it more alive. More descriptive statements is powerful. And I'd also challenge you to, if you're doing 3, do one which is like really like simple. It's like, I'm grateful that the sun beams light on me. I'm grateful that there's trees in my yard. Just something a little bit simple. It doesn't always have to be these big things either.
Yeah, I think that's great. One of the people's hurdles of journaling is often that they are thinking of some like leather bound, thing for their grandchildren to read, and it prevents us. Like we get nervous about it. We feel like we're going to be judged or we're judging ourselves on it. And so one of the hurdles, one of the transformational moments for me was recognizing that I'm writing, gibberish in my and it's okay in my journal. Like, it's not for anybody ever. It's barely for me to ever read. And it's the exercise of getting it out for the day.
Mm-hmm. And even like one of our friends, Keith Roberts, has an awesome product, the Oak Journal. And I see it as actually my place where I get out all these hormones. It's like I do my gratitude to get serotonin boost. I set my intention for the day, which is super powerful. I then look at the dopamine, like, all right, what's my day going to be? How am I going to get my little wins? I write about what's causing me cortisol issues. And then I finish with oxytocin. And it's just it's almost like he's following your format, which is super cool.
Yeah, I love the Oak Journal. We gave I gave the Oak Journal to my board at our board strategy session last year. So I gave it for everybody. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's just a tool right now, and I'll finish with that later. I'll come back to it. Yeah.
On the cortisol side, the biggest hack, the major tool that I like to use that I've found is meditation. And meditation is a skill, and it's a skill that we like. It's literally that act of dropping the cortisol. Biologically, the whole point of the meditation is to drop the cortisol out. So when we talk about the results that people get from meditation, whether it's expansive thinking, whether it is health benefits, it is creative ideas, all of these things are they're the results of dropping cortisol out of our system. The health benefits, so much of our health problems in the country, this country especially, is are stress related. So constant chronic high cortisol related. So the practice and the act of doing meditation and dropping that cortisol every day shifts us into that mode. We know that serotonin and oxytocin are associated with expansive thinking, like identifying creative solutions, like faster creative problem solving, and cortisol is very narrow decision making. So like the whole creative process expands because of things like meditation. I do transcendental meditation, but I do other techniques. Transcendental meditation is a class. You take a class and it's an organization and they give you a mantra, a Sanskrit mantra. And the nice thing about that class is that there's an instructor that you can go ask about, and there's a community that you can go, check in with. And the community is a useful tool along the way. But I've done other things, and sometimes it's useful for me to have others. It's super easy to fall out of a meditation practice, even though it feels so good when you do it. And it's still super easy to wake up in the morning and jump on the phone and start working. And all of a sudden it's 12 hours later and you haven't meditated today. Finn, what do you do to interrupt that challenge?
Yeah, I've got so much to talk about this place. So like journaling, where people go wrong with meditation is they set expectations of the meditation. You don't do meditation. When you think it's an act, then you're actually missing the point. So with meditation, I like to teach people, you're literally just going to sit down. That's all you're doing. It's a sit. You're not doing meditation. And then over time you craft it. But if you just go and sit and just relax and drop into the present moment, wonderful, which is really, really awesome. Also be fluid with yourself. Like I prefer to, rather than saying I'm going to meditate exactly for this time, if you can meditate for 30 seconds, that's better than not meditating at all. So some people, it's especially this entrepreneur driven mindset, it's all or nothing. It's like, I'm doing 2 half-an-hour sits every day, but then it's like, I only have 15 minutes, I can't do it. It's like, yes, you can. Like, that's not a failure. It's okay. You're doing that act, which is incredible. And that's something about this whole world right now. So in the good times, and I see this in EO, everyone wants to talk about meditation and mindfulness and all these activities, and they love to do it. But then when crisis just happens, they want to drop it all away. So that happened in my EO board. We had our first board meeting and I sent out the agenda very clear, but I also put that we will be doing this calming the default mode network. We'll be talking about serotonin. And I got a response back, and it was just about saying, I like this agenda, but I think we just need to get right into the point in crisis. And it was a moment for me as a leader. I had to sit there and go, am I going to just react, or am I going to do what I believe is the right thing to do? And I'm so glad I did. I respected it and I said, thank you. We'll make it short, but this is important. And the meeting went wonderful because we're all in a calm state. So what I'm sharing with you there is that during the good times, that is just practice. It's practice for the time when you actually need to perform. And this is the time we need to perform. So we need to lean into these tools and practices more than ever right now. So even though I'm working more than I've ever worked, besides maybe when I first started my first ever business, I'm not letting any of my practices go. I'm leaning into them more than ever. I'll make time with them because they're so, so valuable for me. So it's a mindset shift, and just go, this isn't a non-negotiable. Like, we need to be doing this.
Yeah, for me, it helps to have a little bit of novelty or like other tools coming in. So for example, like having the Oak Journal helps me remember, like, okay, I'll do the Oak Journal today. It's like it's a tool to do. Or I had somebody forwarded this 21-day, I was at abundance meditation by Deepak Chopra. Yeah. And so, like, all right, I'll do this one for 21 days. And I was a little hesitant at first, but I was like, you know what? This is a really good excuse to just follow meditation. and take the time. And those were 5 or 7 minutes long. And most of the time now once I'm there, I'm like, okay, I'll go past it and do a little more meditation.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. So like I'm a breathwork instructor, and that's one of the things I'll be doing with your retreat. But like Mike shared a breathwork with me, virtual breathwork. And, I just went, you know what? That's so easy. I don't then have to think. I just follow and just go on the journey. And it's great. Now that's just going to be in my Wednesday calendar because I don't have to think. It's why I use Insight Timer as an app sometimes as well. It's like sometimes I don't want to have to think about meditation. It's like I just put one on and use a guided one, which is really, really nice as well. And that's okay. Like it's okay. You've got to be kind to yourself on these areas.
Awesome. And so, those are, we use those tools to get the cortisol out of the system so that, then all of a sudden we can sleep better. And then all of a sudden we're stronger the next day. Like all of the pieces work together so that we can then act when we need to.
And that's probably the key point, isn't it? It's about sleep, because sleep is where we actually boost most of our hormones. It's a cortisol reducer, and we get an oxytocin and serotonin boost as well. So if we are not doing our work to help us with sleep, we're just in a cycle. And that's why it's funny, these times people love the story. It's like, I can justify the drink right now, or I can justify that shitty food because it makes me feel better and it calms me. They say it calms down my cortisol, and it does for a second. But the problem is it then has a cortisol increasing effect because it compounds because you're not getting that sleep. So what I say instead is use an alternative. What you're trying to do is calm yourself. So use breath or meditate instead of having that drink. And then you get this exponential effect. And my reminder whenever I have resistance, and I do, like I'm a serious meditator, been for a long time, but I don't think there's a time where I have felt resistance when I'm sitting down. Like I don't want to do it. And I always remind myself, when have I ever regretted a meditation? And I can't answer it. I can't say there was this time, but having that drink, I've regretted that drink a lot of times. So that's just a little tool for myself.
Yeah, it's interesting. That drink or the food, those things feel good because they trigger dopamine. So comfort food is comfortable because it triggers dopamine. But dopamine is fleeting and it goes away, right? So it's conditional, and when that condition's gone, it goes away. And so that's why we need to be careful with the dopamine.
Yep. Same with Netflix, all these things. It's like they're distractions. It's like if it's a conscious distraction for a little bit, okay. But the problem is it's a dopamine high again.
Yeah, for sure. And so we talked a little bit about the dopamine triggers and the structure of those. And especially in these crisis times, I am focusing on the numbers that are only climbing. So that I can give little dopamine hits out. We want to share the wins, but we don't want to be only on the wins. Let's step a little further into the last, which is oxytocin. We talked about the no coming and going principle. And this is where, it's not inbound or outbound. My oxytocin is an expression of love, of community, of caring. And so when I give it to people, I feel it for myself. So the act of giving, the act of actively communicating that love is the act of giving myself strength. It is the act of giving myself an expanded opportunity view, like of where are my opportunities in the world right now. I see them better with oxytocin, and I get oxytocin by giving love to other people. I do this in my meetings. So as Finn points out, I try to do this too. And because there's always that resistance level, it's always hard even after I do all this work, to wrap our meetings with expressions of oxytocin. It's easier for me now to, like, I wrapped our board meeting last night, and I'm very specifically telling people I love you. But it's hard. It's still hard for me to ask people to share it themselves, even though they feel good. You know, there's still a hurdle there, still resistance there to do it. But that's our power. I do think we felt a lot of oxytocin in that meeting, in that community. You could feel people rallying around the same progress. It felt really good. What else do you have for us on that?
Really, it's simple. You just give love and you get love. And when it comes down to it, that's what we're all seeking. And the funny thing is, the best place to get love is from within. That's been my journey.
You had a really good meditation the other day, the Metta kindness meditation.
Yeah.
Why don't you share that with folks?
Yeah, so the Metta kindness meditation is one of the most powerful meditations you can do. It's been used for thousands of years of how to heal people. And there's actually like scientific evidence of how it can be used to heal war zones. There was a study on a group of meditators were doing the Metta kindness meditation in the Palestinian and Israel war there. And during the 2 years they were collectively doing it, the amount of killings went dramatically down. And it's because all our minds are actually connected. If you look at the Course of Miracles, it's one of the lessons. It's like all our minds are connected and our thoughts are connected. So in the Metta kindness meditation, what you do is you start first giving love to yourself or kind compassion. Then you give it to someone maybe close to you. You then may give it to someone you're indifferent to. And then you might give it to someone who you don't actually like that much. And then finally, you do it for all beings. So my personal ones, and you can work out whatever statements you want. Mine are, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be prosperous, may I be full of loving kindness. And I repeat that 3 times. And then I go to someone I love, and then maybe to all beings. And right now, in this time, it's one of my most powerful practices. I just keep sending out love to the world. And my love just builds up from it. And I've got to believe it's having a positive effect on people.
Yeah, in the book Altered Traits, Daniel Goleman, who wrote Emotional Intelligence, this is his book on the science of meditation. And he talks about when they do the high-def functional MRI scans on the brains of the monks who do the metta kindness, loving kindness meditation, that's where they actually see the most highly trained monks with that meditation in particular is where you can see the physiological changes in the brains most profoundly. It is, the way I think about it is like, give love to the self. That's a big hurdle for me is thinking about giving love and compassion to the self, not beating myself up. But once I get there, like that's a useful, like that in itself is useful. Giving it to those around us is pretty easy, right? We love the people around us. Thinking about then giving love even to the people who want to do us harm is the big step. So for me, like once I've gotten those first 2 steps, now I can go like, yes, I'm going to give love even to like the people who feel like they're actively against me. And it's a physiological shift. It generates the oxytocin. It drops the cortisol. It literally changes the wiring in our brains and creates super positive output.
Yeah, and it's very healing. It's that whole idea, like this is my philosophy in life now. So often entrepreneurs, we have these big aspirations and we want to save the world. That's what we're focusing on. And a lot of the time when I am 100% have been that culprit of that. I've been that person. But when we're doing that, often that is coming from a place where some lacking inside of us, and it can sometimes be a bit egoic. All we need to do is heal ourselves. If we heal ourselves, we heal the world. And if all of us just do that one act, the world's going to be magical. So sometimes focusing less external and on internal can be incredible.
That's great. Finn, it's 5 o'clock. We should be respectful of people's times, but we can take questions, you know, in the chat if you want, or we can, you can email us if you're listening to the recording later on. Anybody have things, or should we wrap it up? Okay, I think we're wrapping up now. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope it was useful for you.
Thank you.
And remember, we love
you.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you so much. I'm here anytime. Reach out. I love talking about this stuff. I love all of you greatly. I love my EO tribe. And I hope to see you very soon. That's what's exciting in San Fran.
Thanks, everyone.